All right, everybody. Welcome to our Veggie Gardening class here at Fossil Creek Nursery. This is Hunter, one of our sales associates here. So yeah, I'm just going to go over a few things with starting your veggie garden, for your soil, location, irrigation. We'll talk a little bit about specific plants. And so let's get into it then. So I'm going to start off first talking about your setup. First thing, as everybody knows, location, the most important thing. So you want to have a spot in your garden that gets about 6 to 8 hours of sunlight a day. 6 hours is definitely kind of that critical point. If you have a little bit less, it'll definitely still work. It just won't be as much of a fruit set. But yeah, having that 6 to 8 hours of sun is one of the most important pieces of your location. Something that's south facing is going to be the area that gets the most sun. Also, one thing that's good about south facing is the soil warms up quicker. So warmer soil, the quicker that you'll be able to plant, be able to get that good growth, and have a successful garden. So next I'll talk a little bit about your soil quality. Specifically, I'm going to start with your quality for having a raised bed or for a container garden. What I do specifically at home is I use a 50-50 mix of Fox Farm, specifically the Ocean Forest. It's great stuff. It's bat guano and earthworm casting based. Gives you a little bit of baseline nutrients, and it's also organic, which I'm a very big proponent of. So I mix that 50-50 with peat moss. Peat moss is a semi-renewable resource. It's taken from peat bogs, and basically the use for the peat moss is it gives you good soil structure, good aeration, and it also holds water well. It's well drained, so you're going to get good porosity in it also, but it is also good for holding that moisture in to give your plants that water and be more efficient at water use. If we're going to talk about planting in-ground, and specifically in Colorado, we're talking about mostly Colorado things in this lesson. So we have clay soil that has high pH. Clay soil is essentially like working with concrete. So what we want to do is amend that soil when we plant. Our recommendation and what we use specifically here at Fossil Creek is a cotton burr compost. So cotton burr compost is a dried compost that is made out of the burrs of cotton, which used to be just a waste product. So once again, a renewable resource that is usually just a trash item has now been used for compost. So really good stuff. We'll mix about a third of that compost in with the native soil. So 1/3 part of the compost to 2/3 part of the native soil. That is because you want a little bit of that native soil in the ground. Otherwise, your plants it's going to be too rich of a hole that you plant if you use too much compost. So having that native soil will actually encourage the plants to grow into the clay, which is something that's tough to do. When we're talking about organic matter in the soil, we want to have about 5% organic matter. In Colorado, we have very low. It's around 1 to 2%. Adding that compost to it is going to raise the organic matter and also help with your beneficial microbes. It's just general soil quality. I talked a little bit about our high pH in the soil. So our pH in Colorado is anywhere between 7.5 to 8.5. That's because we have a lot of gypsum in our soil also, which is a basic element or basic compound. So a way to lower your pH is to use a sulfur supplement. So we have a few of those. We have one specifically that's called a soil acidifier. That's got some micronutrients in it too, but it's got sulfur, so that diluted sulfur actually is beneficial and will lower the pH. And we want a pH of about 6.0 to 6.5. 6.0 to 6.5 is very crucial because in that range is when the most nutrients can be taken up. So things like iron, which is usually unavailable in the soil, gets unlocked with that. And then a way to calculate how much compost you need is very simple. Google, there's a great resource. It's just a compost calculator. essentially type in your dimensions of your raised bed container, your regular garden, and it'll give you a calculation on how much cubic foot of compost you'll need to use. Really good stuff. I use it myself. So we talked a little bit about setting up your garden. Let's talk about irrigation, very important part. Using drip irrigation is the recommended way about going to water your veggie garden. And I'll just say a couple of things why. With like overhead watering, you can promote fungus on your, especially when fruit set is happening. That is when your tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, all of the flowering veggies, that is when they're most susceptible to having fungus. So if you're doing overhead watering, you're obviously getting water onto the leaves, onto areas where it's going to promote fungal growth. So having that drip irrigation, you won't ever run into that problem. Drip irrigation is also much more efficient. When you have a slow drip, it actually will help spread the water more evenly throughout the soil. Whereas if you're using something like a spray overhead sprinkler, you're going to miss spots, you're going to get more on certain spots, and it's just harder to control in general. And then I saw a quick question about what zone we're in. So in Fort Collins, we are a 5A, which basically means that we're closer to that -20 lowest possible temperature. Of course, that happens kind of rarely. So, I think last year the coldest we got was about -10, which is super cold. But yeah, we're in a 5A. And so a little more into irrigation. It's best to irrigate in the early AM before it gets really warm, especially here in Colorado. We have such an intense sunlight and heat, especially in July when it's 100 degrees for a week straight. If you water during the day, it's just going to evaporate. Water early in the morning, we're talking like 6 a.m. Between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. is the best times to water. And you want to water really deep and infrequently. So watering deep is going to encourage your roots to grow deeper. So we're talking about watering, with the drip system. If we've got a 1 gallon per hour one, we're talking about 30 to 45 minutes running that drip system. You're not going to want to run it every day because that can lead to root rot and things like that. But having that deep watering route as opposed to frequent, but a little bit of watering, if you're only getting, this much coverage underneath the plant with that water, then you're going to have roots that only go to the surface. If you're watering, say this deep, then your roots are going to go down. Stronger plant, healthier plant, more resistant to things like wind and weather and stuff like that. So just generally a better way of going about watering. And then, so moving on to animal control, or just in general, keeping pests, deer, things like that out of your garden. Just a couple steps you can do. Obviously, fences, chicken wire is the best way to keep out your pets. If you're going to want to keep out things like moles or even rabbits, you're going to want to bury the bottom half of that chicken wire about 6 inches underneath the ground. And that's because, rabbits dig, moles burrow, things like that, they can get through. If we're talking about things like deer, then you're going to talk about a little bit more structure to it. A deer can hop very high. I've seen deer jump 6-foot fences easily. So you're going to want to probably have at least an 8-foot fence. I know that's pretty big, but deer are pretty wily, and they can figure out ways to get in, especially if they're hungry. Some ways to also keep away pests, organic fashion, and also safe for pets is use, there's products that have the blood meal in it, but just getting a basic blood meal product and sprinkling it around the outside of your garden will actually scare things like rabbits and moles away because they smell the blood, they think there's a predator around, and then they're out of there. They don't want anything to do with it. So kind of a cheap and easy way to prevent small pests and things like that. All right. And then since we're talking about pests anyways, let's talk about bugs and things like that. IPM, which is an organic way of insect preventative management, as it says IPM. So good cultural practices to prevent bugs would be to not have too much watering. When watering will to root rot and things will promote fungus gnats. Their larva likes to live in the soil, and you'll see the fungus gnats after the larva is in there. So it's something that happens before you can really even tell that's happening, because their larva gets in there, you have no idea, and then all of a sudden you have fungus gnats. And those fungus gnats larvae feed on the roots, which we really want to protect. Another way to culturally help keeping bugs away is pruning or defoliating your plants. If you got more airflow through the inside of the plant, it's going to help with fungus, but also help basically give the bugs less of a hiding spot, if you will, to have. Other forms of pest management would be using things like neem oil. Neem oil is an extraction that's just a horticultural oil. There's ones that have sesame oil in it, neem oil. There's other products in it, but neem oil specifically has a active ingredient in it called azodactyrin. And azodactyrin is very useful in controlling aphids, which we definitely have aphids and problems here in Colorado. And it's also good for spider mites. Along with that, the neem oil for soft-bodied insects, it'll essentially suffocate them because it is such a thick and viscous oil. It will encompass the bug, and the bug won't be able to breathe, and that's the end of him. And speaking of pests, it's not necessarily a pest, but weeds are annoying, so we might as well call them a pest. Good ways of doing pre-germination weeding, which is going to save you a lot of issues in the long run, would be to pre-germinate weeds. So pre-germinating is an organic way to basically inoculate the germination of the seeds for the weeds before you even plant anything. So for example, in April, when it was starting to warm up a little bit, I really watered in my veggie garden really well, really deep, and basically made those weed seeds pop up. So once the weeds started growing, just ripped them out of the ground. Another way to do it, if you really want to get a little bit crazy with it, is use a flame weeder. Of course, that is kind of an extreme way to control weeds, but it is another way. And then also another pre-germination product is something called corn gluten meal. And the enzyme in the corn gluten actually will break down the seed husk, and the seed will not germinate. This is something that needs to be done early in the season, even before April, before seeds even start to germinate. Because if the seeds are already germinated, the seeds are already starting to pop up, the enzyme will do absolutely nothing. And then, of course, pulling weeds, I discourage the use of sprays, but of course, if things get out of control, you have many options to use for weed control like that. And then, of course, you can always pull them by hand, but nobody likes to do that. All right, so we talked a little bit about setting it up, irrigation, things like that. Let's just talk about plants in general, and starting off with seed. I like to start plants from seed. You can get a really good choice of what exactly you want, and in my opinion, it's more rewarding. Just seeing things come from seed to plants to fruit is pretty awesome. It's a pretty amazing thing. How I do my seeds is I'll get a tray, usually like one that's got a 16 pod or even 32 if you want to do something bigger. I'll germinate my seeds in a seed starting soil. So that seed starting soil is a little less rich. You don't want to have too much fertilizer when you're planting seeds because it will actually do more harm than good. Another thing that's really important for seeds germinating is they need a warm soil to germinate in. So this can be done by using something like a reptile mat to put underneath your tray and to keep that seed area warm. Usually about 78 to 80 degrees is your prime temperature, but as long as you're keeping it warm, you're definitely going to have a good success with it. Along with that, indoor lights can get expensive, but there is definitely cheaper options you can find on Amazon. Using T5 fluorescent lights are, in my opinion, most efficient and best way to start seeds start from seed. Pretty simple. You want to have that light pretty close to the seeds. I have it only about a foot above it. So after a couple weeks, it takes about 2 to 3 weeks before your seeds are going to be ready for transplant. So we are a little bit late in the season, but it doesn't stop you from wanting to plant seeds for sure. Something that we're not going to have to deal with right now because we've already gotten pretty warm, but when you're starting earlier in the season, hardening off is really important for having your plants be used to the cool weather. Using like a cold frame or covering your plants with a tarp outside for the first week or so before actually transplanting into the ground is how you want to harden things off, and that basically just gets it used to the cooler temperatures. Because when you're inside and growing with a light, it can be warmer for one, and then also, of course, you don't want to be cold in your house, so you're going to keep that heat on, and the plants aren't going to be exposed to the cold temperatures, especially how up and down we are in Colorado. Hardening off is really important. Transplanting, I always say transplant at least the week after Mother's Day. As we've seen in the last couple of days, it got down to the 30s and even snowed a little bit in some places. So it's one of those things you kind of got to play it by ear. I myself haven't even transplanted in. I'm planning on doing that on Friday. And you still got plenty of time, especially if you start your seeds early in the season and you've already got some growth on them. Once you get them in the ground, start giving them that good compost, giving them some root stimulator. It's really, you're going to really see some results. So the biggest thing with transplanting is you don't want to plant too deep. So plant a wide hole. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just make sure you're not covering up too much of the stem of the plant, because that can lead to issues in the long run, such as root rot and things like that. Using root stimulator is the recommended way of going about fertilizing at the beginning. Root stimulator is a high phosphorus fertilizer that's got some root stimulator in it. It's a big long word, but basically IAA is a chemical in the plant that is released. It's a hormone, sorry, not a chemical. A hormone that is released in the plant when they are setting up roots. So the root stimulator essentially gives it a little bit of a boost. So yeah, the root stimulator is your biggest thing for transplanting. And then moving into fertilizer, I'll show you, this is my favorite top dressing fertilizer. So this is an all-around tomato and vegetable. As you can see, the first number is 5. That's going to be your nitrogen. So nitrogen is something that promotes big green growth. It's something you use before fruit set, which will basically, it's for making your plants big, if we want to put it in simple terms. Later in the season, this middle number, which is phosphorus, that's going to be the one that you're looking at the most for your fruit set. So phosphorus, the way I remember it, is phosphorus for flowers. Flowers equal fruit, so more flowers, we're going to have more fruit. So that's a big one. And this product is called Happy Frog Fox Farm. And this one can be used either as a mixture with when you're watering, or it can be used as a top dress. And when you're top dressing, it's essentially just taking a spoon and kind of sprinkling that fertilizer in the root area. You don't want to get it too close to the plant because it can burn it, but using that on the top is your best bet. And then I'll show you the root stimulator. So this is the root stimulator, high phosphorus, that middle number, and then this long word right here is that root hormone. And then I'll show you, so this one is Tiger Bloom. So this is specifically for blooms. And you can see that 8 and less nitrogen. So that high number 8, that's going to be your phosphorus for the blooms. And this is also a Fox Farm product. And then I skipped over just real quick. We'll go back a second. I'll show you. This is the neem product that I was speaking about, horticultural oil. Really good stuff. And it's organic, so not harmful to bees or anything like that, which is really important for our gardens. Something that's a systemic for a little more intense insect control is this triple action. It's also a fungicide, but the biggest thing is you see the active ingredient pyrethrins. Pyrethrin is a chemical that is extremely effective at controlling aphids and spider mites. And then one more thing for the fungicide. So this is copper soap fungicide. This is also an organic product. This is a concentrate and it's a spray. So you use this, you mix this in a spray bottle with water. There's the directions obviously on this side. And this is a foliar spray. And this is what you can use to control fungus issues. Well, that about does it for everything I got. I can answer a couple questions real quick before we end. So yeah, go ahead and fire away with the questions. All right, well, if we got no questions, we're gonna go ahead and stop it here. So thanks everybody for coming in and tuning in. My name is Hunter once again, and we'll see you next time.